Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicoast. We're recording on November 22nd, 2018, and this is episode 114. Politicoast is the BC Politics Podcast. Tell us what you think of the show by leaving a review or get at us on social media. Most importantly, help us build the show by throwing us a couple bucks a month at patreon.com/politicoast. I'm Ian Bushfield.
And I'm Stewart Prest.
Welcome, guest host.
Well, thank you.
You've not actually been on Politicoast yet, have you?
I was.
Okay, you were one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm now a repeat guest.
Welcome back. As always, this intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. On today's show, we're going to break down the continued chaos in the legislature that basically closed out the session.
More chaos.
All the chaos, all the time. Politicoast is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to britishcolumbiatoday.ca. And now, anyone who went 2 weeks ago and signed up would have gotten like the best content. And I think Shannon's got a couple more good editions coming out, so go sign up.
Go do it.
Sign up for 2 weeks, then cancel if you're cheap. But hopefully you will stay on because it's valuable.
Right. This is the time you need that kind of information.
Well, let's get into it. My plan was initially, because Scott's on vacation, I'm interviewing Bowen Ma, MLA in North Van tomorrow. Most popular on Twitter, MLA, I think. And I thought, that'll be a nice end of session discussion. But then the chaos of last week spilled over into the 2 days of legislature that were left. I just needed to podcast it, needed to catch up. So thank you for filling in and helping me break this down.
Oh, my pleasure. It's a good week to talk BC politics.
So right after I basically hit publish on Friday last week, we start seeing more and more news come out. I think the biggest thing, there's a bunch of little things. Letters started flying everywhere, a war of the letters kind of situation. The Liberals calling for this emergency meeting of the legislative, I think it's like an administrative management committee, LAMC, which, your scandals are getting interesting when the obscure parliamentary committees are being demanded.
Yeah, I checked the website. They haven't actually updated the membership yet. It still lists as of prior to the 2017 election. So was not a hotbed until now.
It's the committee that, as far as I can tell, is responsible for internal affairs, of just making sure Parliament itself runs well, people get paid and that kind of stuff.
That's right. It's like a housekeeping committee. It has powers that are provided to it by the Assembly. The Assembly says, we don't want to deal with all this stuff. We're going to let you take care of it.
Which does sound like the right place to deal with scandals involving the officials of the legislature, the Clerk and Sergeant-at-Arms. The committee is scheduled to meet on December 6th. And it sounds like they are not meeting until December 6th, despite the constant protest of the Liberals over the last week. One of the other letters the Liberals sent was this long list of questions about the motion that they agreed to that dismissed Gary Lenz and Craig James. And they sent this to House leaders Mike Farnworth of the NDP and Sonia Furstenau of the BC Greens. As far as I know, they didn't get back, but on Monday, Daryl Pleckus did.
Yes, he decided he was going to write his own letter in return. We're getting a scandal by letter. It could be like a Mary Shelley novel by the end of it, right? Just tell a story through letters.
And we had, I guess, a little bit of stuff from Wally Opal, just, I think, putting his foot down and really starting to clean up the Speaker's office, just in terms of stopping all these weird little press conferences that Mullen was running and just going, no, Pleckus, you are going to be quiet and we are just going to let the cops do their job.
Yeah. So we see a clear, almost hermetic, sealed compartment between what are now two distinct processes. One is the investigation, and Wally Opal really was instrumental in making it clear to everyone that that is a legitimate investigation. It's going to play itself out, and it is not going to be, and it ought not be interfered with through the parallel discussions and intramural activities that are going on, which politics is going to politic. And Daryl Pleckus has made himself appear vulnerable in a couple of ways, and that's going to have to work itself out. Bringing in Wally Opal was a strong move. His bona fides as a liberal sort of war horse, and all about highly reputable persons has really strengthened and stabilized that situation. But we're still going to have the debates between the Liberals and the NDP and Plecas's office, and that probably will cool down. I think Plecas is happy to be heading into the Christmas break right about now, but at the same time, we have this investigation ongoing, and hopefully that is able to steer clear. That process is left alone by the political process.
Yeah, these two processes really played out on Monday and Tuesday, the last days of the legislature, where you have, or at least in the NDP's view, I think they did a lot to push them together. Because in both question periods, the Liberals were on almost every question for 2 straight days. What did you know? When did you know it? Trying every different angle to say, who was the lawyer you talked to? What did the lawyer say? All right, you're not going to give us legal advice, but did you ask for legal advice? Anything they could. Will you schedule a meeting? Why can't we schedule a meeting? I have these emails that were talking about scheduling a meeting. I think that's a meeting that was scheduled. And at every single question, David Eby just stood up and said, this is an ongoing investigation. You know as well as I do that we can't comment on this. Really like dodging every single thing they threw.
Yeah, it seems clear the Liberals, where they were a little more than a week ago, were convinced that this process had to play out, and they joined in this unanimous motion to suspend the 2 officials with pay. They have had second thoughts, and it's not clear exactly why. And here we just sort of try on different speculative reasons. And one is that they feel like these 2 officials did not get their due in terms of respect for their status. They haven't been charged with the crimes, and yet they were very publicly singled out, and so there's perhaps some sympathy for them. They've been serving for quite some time, and so that's one part of it. Then in this other piece is that the Liberals clearly don't like Darryl Plecas, and if they have an opportunity to make his life more difficult, it seems like they're keen to do that. And that goes back to how we have this current government formed with him sitting as an independent now and acting as speaker. So yeah, it's hard to sort of give a single explanation for why the Liberals have suddenly spun about and changed their position, but that really has altered the dynamics within that political process.
I'm going to come back to both of those hypotheses, the Lenz and James not getting due process and the Plecas hate. Let's do them in that order. So on Monday, we see this press conference here in Vancouver, which I guess they hired a fancy downtown Vancouver lawyer who's fairly well respected and hold the press conference there. They did eventually do a call-in line, so the reporters at the press gallery could ask questions, because there was some initial grumblings, as reporters will do on Twitter, of like, oh, if your press conference is in Vancouver and we're all in Victoria, are you dodging questions? But it turns out they didn't have much to say, because they hold this press conference, and this follows a letter they sent on Friday denying that they were involved in any wrongdoing. And the press conference basically was just that. Them saying, we haven't done anything. We want to go back to work. This is stressful for ourselves. This is stressful for our families. What do we need to do?
And we have heard the parallel drawn between this and the health firings under the previous government. And so it seems like that's in the back of some people's minds, that if you have officials who while they have a public role, are not themselves politicians, and they are suddenly thrust into this very public, very uncomfortable spotlight. If it turns out that they did nothing wrong, then they have suffered a certain amount of harm that you can't really take back. So that is a concern. And they do seem to be keen to talk, even if they don't have a lot to say, other than that they don't know what's going on. That is unusual. It suggests that they're at least comfortable in their not knowing, or I mean, we're just hanging hypotheses on virtually nothing.
Well, they were keen to talk once they got into their lawyer's office like a week later. So they had time to lawyer up and then sort of bare their souls.
Which is weird, right? Usually after you talk to the lawyer says don't say a word.
But you could imagine a lawyer who says, they don't have anything on you. You can play the sympathy card right now.
Right.
And that seems like a smart play, and they seem sympathetic. Mm-hmm. I think you were saying even before we started recording, they seem credible.
Right.
And in this kind of situation, that value of credibility when there are there aren't even allegations out.
Yeah. I mean, there's a fundamental piece of this that doesn't yet make sense. There's what seems to be a very credible investigation ongoing. The RCMP is taking this very seriously. We have these two long-serving officials. They seem very credible. The least credible piece is possibly this special advisor Mullen, and he is no longer an active member of this drama. So Wally Oppel has pretty much taken his place in advising the speaker's office. But so we're just waiting for more information to come out, because we really don't know. This doesn't all add up yet.
Well, so going back to the Liberals and why they are now expressing regret for supporting this motion, the other hypothesis you pitch is their long-seated disdain now for Darryl Plecas through essentially this entire government. And we don't need to hypothesize that that exists. When question period finished on Monday, Andrew Wilkinson walked out and did a little scrum with media where I had a number of journalists describe it as bizarre and wild. I guess Wilkinson talked about how Plecas is out of control. He's setting up his own little empire in the speaker's office, and just really tried to paint him as this like villain. On the other hand, I can feel for Plecas because it really seems like he's been isolated. And a lot of the time for this entire drama, it seems like Darryl needed a friend.
If we want to back this out to political science for a second, it sort of underlines the importance of having a party behind you, right? Plecas is alone. He's sitting as an independent. He's not caucusing with anyone. He doesn't have a team anymore. When he crossed the floor, he burnt whatever bridges he had with the Liberals and then some. And he's not part of the NDP family exactly either. He's clearly working with them to make this legislature work, and I'm sure he has some sympathy. But he also seems like he just wanted to have someone he could feel like was in his corner, that was lacking prior to that, and lacking the resources of parties to draw and to make sure he's making the best possible choice. He found someone that he trusted, but they ended up being someone who's outside politics, and that has been part of the story as well. No one really knows within the world of Victoria politics, which is a small sort of world where everybody knows everyone. People don't know this person, and so that has been I think a mark against him, or treated as such.
And this entire scandal is clearly wearing at Plecas. We saw him on Monday, after I think it was question period and a couple other procedural things had finished, walking back to his office where the media's camped out, trying to get anything out of him, as is their job. And he just turns to them at some point and goes, "You people," and he tells them that they should be doing their due diligence, and then sort of slams the door in their face, which, not a great look. And you can imagine his frustration.
No, clearly the situation is wearing on him. And in the defense of the reporters, they were there doing their due diligence and trying to get information out of all the principals. But maybe the Christmas break will do him some good as well. Certainly it will, I think, help this situation to the extent that this has struck at some of the sort of underlying sort of structural behind the scenes pieces of the legislature and threatened to possibly politicize some of the governance of the institution, or at least render it less automatic. And it's the sort of thing where ideally you don't want to have to think about it at all. And so now we're thinking about these officials and these offices that are crucial to the smooth operation of the legislature. And it would be good for the health of the institution to have that temperature turned down, and hopefully the Christmas break will help accomplish that.
Yeah, totally. Like, Plecas's comments were, in the video I watched, seemingly out of frustration, and I get that. But on the other hand, there's almost like a grain of truth in there. And BC's media, for the most part, is like, that are watching the legislature, it's like 4 or 5 guys who've been doing it for a long time. And they have the connections, they know everyone knows them, and it's a very access journalism. You know, you get the whisper from here and there, and you have your sources and all of that. And it's in that kind of situation where you would expect some big scandal involving 2 of the highest nonpartisan officials in the House that should have leaked at some point, or at least, even if there's nothing there, the fact Plecas had this guy coming into his office regularly from Abbotsford doing his own investigation, possibly for months, and everyone missed it, does kind of raise questions about, like, what is the situation there? Like, are people keeping up with everything, or are they getting a little bit too chummy at times and maybe like missing some of the tougher questions. And I'm like, these people do good work. Like I read Vaughn and Keith Baldry and Rob Shaw and Richard Zussman and all of them, but I mean, I can't do it. I'm not there, but
Yeah.
it does kind of raise that question of how did everyone miss all of this?
Right. And well, maybe Mullen is good at doing preliminary. I forget. I don't think they called it due diligence, but he might have used that phrase. Actually, yeah, he did use the phrase that the due diligence before contacting the RCMP. And so maybe they just really tried and successfully kept it quiet because no one thought there would be anything going on in the speaker's office. Was worthy of additional attention. But yeah, it is perhaps unusual that no one got a whiff of this story until moments before it broke. And even now, I mean, we hear there's very little that has leaked in terms of what this is actually about. We've had a couple of off-the-record comments, but it seems like this is a ship that isn't leaking right now. And maybe that's just commendable on the parts of those who are involved.
Everyone's happy in their jobs, unlike in the Trump administration where everyone's happy to like make new friends.
Certainly in a minority situation, there's always less room for error. So that does tend to focus the mind of everyone involved.
So in terms of keeping things very on message, on Tuesday, I want to come back to the question period there because that one was very different. Monday had a very somber feel where everything was like clearly like the weight of the scandal was weighing on everyone in the legislature, and it was almost a performance of just, we have to ask, you have to say no. Tuesday, it got a bit more angry and punching at each other. And at one point, John Horgan jumps up and jumps into a question and pivots it from, no, I won't have a comment on that, but also, here's all the things the Liberals did wrong for so long, and here's all the things we're doing right now in a typical partisan style. But question period on Tuesday started off really bizarrely because one of the first questions was again about the Speaker's office, of course, and Darryl Plecas decided to recuse himself.
Right.
Which I don't think happens very often, at least in terms of question period.
No, again, this is evidence that this is taking a toll on the institutions of the legislature itself, because the Speaker would only recuse themselves when questioning is about something to do with the Speaker, which is not supposed to be ever.
And I think one of the first questions was even someone tried to direct it at Darryl Plecas, which I don't think you can do.
No,
it's supposed to be of the government.
Right, and that you can ask points of order, but then to direct a substantive question as opposed to a point of order, then that just changes the dynamic and not in a productive way.
Yeah, so poor Deputy Speaker Raj Chauhan had to step in and manage that chaos, and he tried a couple times to rule things out of order, and I think he was successful on one, but it's a weird thing because question period is generally just let the opposition ask whatever they want. It's a free speech zone in the traditional sense. The government apparently doesn't have to answer. We've learned that well from the last couple federal governments, the last couple provincial governments. And
they have to utter words.
Yeah.
They have to make noises that form sentences, but they don't actually have to provide substantive answers.
Yeah. So we get no new information from EB there, and that kind of begs the question of why is the NDP doing everything to stonewall this? I mean, the obvious answer is just there's no benefit to them in giving out any information.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps there's a feeling that given the amount of attention it's created as well, there's every reason to try to make sure that everything is found out before revealing any more information, that it's already sort of become much too public, and trying to put a stop to that process, although of course it's hard to half explain something to the public that leaves no one satisfied.
I guess that really takes us through everything that's happened in the last week.
It takes us to the end of Tuesday anyways.
The end of Tuesday. And really since Tuesday when the legislature rose, nothing more is broken on what's probably the biggest scandal of the legislature since it's returned, or even possibly since BC Rail.
Yeah, I think we'll have one more bit of fireworks next week when this LAMC, I don't know how to pronounce it.
They were saying LAMC in the legislature.
LAMC. And when LAMC meets next week, December 6th, as scheduled, then perhaps we'll find a little bit more information, or perhaps we'll just see more fireworks, or perhaps everybody will have calmed down over the weekend and we'll have a more circumspect sort of administrative process after all.
So do you think there's a value in the Liberals really moving from the supporting the motion and generally just wanting to see justice done, whatever that was, to making this a more partisan specific issue, and both going after Plecas personally and the NDP for stonewalling.
I mean, clearly the Liberals feel like they don't have trust in this speaker, and they wanted to make that well known, and they didn't really before for different reasons, but that this gives them this real opportunity to settle a score, and it's hard to separate that from any concern about due process after they went along with the initial motion to suspend. And it's unfortunate in the sense that it does really make this process inherently politicized, and people will tend to take sides as a result. And I don't think that's doing anyone any good. Certainly not. I don't think that's what James and Lenz want either. One of the striking things about their press conference on Monday was that they really don't sound like they bear a grudge or are feeling like this is the work of someone out to get them, and that they see this as a process of justice and an investigation that they are supporting, but they just feel that the particularly public nature of it was regrettable and has taken a toll on them. And again, they sounded credible. Both of them said versions of that, and it's impossible. I just listened to it on the radio, and again, we're just speculating and making snap judgments, but it sounded like that was true. And so I don't think making the process even more politicized and turning up the temperature more would be necessarily what they would want to have happen. They just want to see some kind of recognition that they're not charged with anything, and that they want to sort of get back to some degree of normalcy until the process plays out. But of course, you can't unwind what has already happened, and the entire legislature did vote that way. And so at this point, it really seems like it would do everyone the most good if we could just let that process play out and not talk about it. And then perhaps after that process play out, ask any questions that are necessary about whether Plecas exercised good judgment at every step. It's possible that this investigation, the pre-investigation was not superbly well thought out. We don't know. Maybe a bit hasty. Maybe the RCMP should have been called in at an earlier date. We don't know. And that seems like that would be a separate set of questions to ask. And doing it right now and in this way is not going to get at those answers. It's just going to put up these walls that we now see. And we just see lobs of those verbal fisticuffs, as you call it, going back and forth. So now my metaphors are crashing on top of one another.
Well, we'll have a couple months to let the cops do their jobs. The legislature doesn't return until early mid-February, and if LAMC doesn't churn up anything, which I imagine it won't, all they're going to do is yell at each other for a little bit and then, I don't know, pass a budget. I think someone was saying in one of the QPs that all their meetings have generally just been like approving the minutes of the last meeting. We've all been in those.
Yeah.
But that'll be interesting. This idea of a botched investigation, it actually reminded me that there was one other story I didn't put in the notes, so I won't ask you to comment on this if you didn't see it. But it was yesterday, David Eby was actually, or it was even today, giving an update on the money laundering work he's been doing. And he was talking about the RCMP, I believe it was, had been looking at one specific case, and they've actually just stayed charges on this e-pirate investigation they were doing without really telling us why. So when you launch a big money laundering probe, as the government has done, and you get to the point where you're starting to file charges against different companies, it suggests you're getting close to something. But at some point, something in this investigation broke. Either they screwed up in the investigation, maybe mishandled evidence or something, or maybe the people were innocent all along and they just got the wrong guys, or who knows what else. But the cops decided it was not worth pursuing these specific cases, which, when you're not given much more information than that, is similarly frustrating when the province has launched this big corruption not inquiry, but investigations. And we had the German report tell us lots of bad stuff's happening, but no one's facing any penalties yet.
Yeah. I read the story briefly when it came out, and it's, on the one hand, we always want to have a presumption of innocence and everyone's due process respected. But on the other hand, when something so clearly has happened, which sort of tears at the fabric of the province in certain ways, right? This has been enormously destructive, and we're still only getting our heads around it. And for charges to be stayed without explanation why, so it looks like there's now a review to figure out why that was, and whether there was a mess up in the investigation that is causing essentially the court case to making it impossible to follow through on that. It would be thrown out of court at some point. Hopefully we'll find that out at some point down the road. But in the meantime, it seems like we've just allowed in $1.5 billion, whatever the amount is. And that's, no one is necessarily ever going to suffer legal consequences for it.
Yeah. I mean, on that topic, I haven't actually had time to dig into the stories yet, but Sam Cooper's had a couple good investigations come out on Global News talking about the scale of corruption going through this province, how it's connected to Chinese gangs, how it's feeding fentanyl. I'll throw links in the show notes for those, but it's just kind of all not coming together in a nice, neat package, but just pointing that all of these, the opioid epidemic, the housing affordability, and all these other things are connected in some ways. That's not to say corruption is the leading driver in the housing crisis, but it's not helping.
Yeah. Not having any definitive information even now, we have estimates about how much money has come into the province, but we have wildly varying accounts of that overall effect, and people different arguments about what should be done about the housing crisis and what is causing it, and people can sort of read whatever they want into this situation and make their arguments accordingly. And sometimes it becomes very anti-foreigner, and sometimes it becomes very anti-money, and without any sort of sound basis, the sort that a court case might have provided. It would at least give us one concrete glimpse into this world. And so we're still left with reports and estimates and a lot of speculation, which is, again, not great.
Well, let's run through a handful of other stories that have been going through BC politics this past week. First, I want to touch on a random debate that happened in the middle of all of this other stuff that was happening on Monday at the legislature. One of the MLAs brought forward a motion to support SOGI 123, the educational program to support sexual orientation and gender identity instruction in schools, and to make sure people of all SOGIs feel safe in schools. And lots of powerful speeches from MLAs all across the benches saying, here's why this is important. Spencer Chandra Herbert talking about his experience as a gay man. NDP MLA Doug Rootley actually talked about his experiences as a bisexual man, which I don't think anyone had known before that, or at least outside his close personal family. So in a very, I guess just not even spectacular or just sort of matter-of-fact way, Rootley says, he's experienced stigma for a number of years as a bisexual, and he came out in the middle of the legislature, and it didn't even make a news story. Yeah,
so I guess for one thing, it's always wonderful to have more strong role models in that kind of setting, just to show people that it's possible for anyone to fulfill any role in society now. And the fact that it didn't make news is, in a sense, great, right? We are getting to a point where it's not noteworthy. It's just part of life, and that's nothing to see here, and we can move on. And that's in a sense, that's kind of cool, just how unremarked upon it was.
I did see Press Progress picked up on another speech in there, and this is one that I'd already picked up on. This was Laurie Thronis, who I talked about last week, for his abstention to the Human Rights Commission vote. Thronis decided to say he's not in favor of bullying, obviously, but if we teach kids about gender identity, it might cause mental health issues for them. And he bizarrely talked about how growing up he had been teased because Laurie was seen by some of his friends as a girl's name. Kids are terrible. And so I don't doubt that he was teased and bullied for this. But he said that if he knew of gender identity, he might have thought, oh, maybe I am just a girl.
Yeah,
and then been trans, and then he might have tried to hurt himself because of that confusion.
That's not really how that works.
No, this is problematic.
Yeah, so that that's not how that works at all. I think it's so important for kids. So I'm a father. I have 2 kids, a 5 and a 6-year-old, and so we see on the playground how important it is for kids to see that there's all sorts of ways to be alive and to live a life, and they're all just fine. And that is astonishingly freeing for kids, that if they have questions about who they are, and they all do, if you can point to someone and say, see, there's family with 2 dads, that's fine, 2 moms, that's fine. Mm-hmm. There's every combination you can imagine. All those are possible, and it's all just fine. Having those kinds of role models is really powerful for kids. And again, it becomes powerful in part when it becomes so unnoteworthy. And for kids, they can accept that kind of information really easily. And if no one makes a big deal about it, they don't make a big deal about it, and everyone just moves on. And so these kinds of programs, getting kids talking about this early on, giving them language to discuss issues of gender identity and so on, it can be just really powerful, and kids won't even necessarily notice that it's happening.
Yeah, I'm fully in support. The NDP also got through basically every other bill they were trying to get through this session. It almost looked like they weren't going to do it, but on that last Tuesday afternoon, they pushed time allocation when they had to, and they got through, I think there were 2 bills left that day, one on the agricultural land reserve, I think, don't quote me on that, but the big one that the Liberals were really trying to obstruct was this bill to enact the second electoral reform referendum should PR pass, which, man, if they almost had a little bit longer sitting, they could just wait to find out if they even need that. But they got that vote through. And so we will have a referendum in 2 elections unless we keep first past the post or a future government repeals that bill.
Right.
Because that's all it takes.
Yeah. It's not a foolproof thing, because no legislature can bind another legislature, but it would be a very public process. And so that, one presumes, would extract a political price if somebody unwound that legislation.
The only bill actually that didn't pass, and it sat, I think, at second reading, which was, it got introduced and then the NDP just didn't touch it again. And this was from the spring session, was their bill to enact anti-SLAPP legislation. And so this is modeled off of something that's in Ontario, and a few states have it. And SLAPP is strategic litigation against public participation. So these are libel lawsuits, defamation lawsuits that aren't necessarily done in good faith. I have a bunch of money and you're criticizing me, so I'm going to hire a bunch of lawyers to threaten to sue you, and to prove you didn't libel me, do it in court. Oh, you don't have any money? I guess I won. Mm-hmm. This legislation essentially takes you as the little guy and lets you say, hey, he's trying to shut me up, and the court can throw it out much quicker. So it's a nice way for, the media, bloggers, people who just are trying to criticize on the internet, others on the internet.
It's a measure to protect free speech then.
Yeah, it is. But the NDP decided not to move along with it, which was very weird because they'd campaigned heavily on it. They actually brought it in just before they were defeated in 2001, and it was one of the first things Gordon Campbell repealed. That was painful for civil libertarians. But it's been frustrating to watch this not move forward, and the NDP has been cagey about why. And there have been some comments out of the AG's office saying, oh, it's about, we're waiting for other litigation to go through to see where that goes. And no one's really known what that was. So they finally figured out, as far as I can tell, there's basically a SLAPP suit happening in Ontario that's now at the Court of Appeal, and they haven't said this case is specifically the one they're watching, as far as I can tell, but I think it was a former minister is being sued by a former bureaucrat over something that happened. And one of them has filed the anti-SLAPP motion against the other. And so neither is really the little guy, but it's kind of the government is tied up against itself, against the bureaucracy. And so this government is probably not wanting that to happen to them. So And if the Court of Appeal there says the anti-SLAPP legislation is unconstitutional for reasons X, Y, or Z, they may as well rewrite the legislation before bringing it in and then having to amend it anyway.
Right, rather than to go to the trouble of having it tried and tested out at work.
Yeah, so we'll almost for sure see it in the spring.
Although, presumably that depends on the timing of this Ontario case.
On the Court of Appeal. I think that's coming soon, that ruling, but it has been just frustrating with how quiet the government has been about this, because no one was really giving any comments, and then Shannon Waters with BC Today finally got some comments from John Horgan, the Premier himself, about this, I think on like the last day of the legislature. But like Mike Farnworth, the House Leader, was like, oh, it's just waiting, don't worry about it. And the AG's office was just not taking calls about the issue. And it's like, there are a number of people. It's a semi-obscure issue, but it is an important one for being able to criticize people in power and free speech and all of that. But just do it.
Just be transparent. Yeah.
But while we're in courts, BC, after the legislature rose for the holidays, announced that we are going to court as a province. We're going to intervene in support of the federal government and its climate action plan in the cases being filed in Ontario and Saskatchewan. So this is where Saskatchewan thinks it's unconstitutional for the federal government to impose a carbon tax on them, and Ontario has made the same claim because Doug Ford is now premier. The federal government is saying, we have that right, it's a shared responsibility, we can do this. And BC is just going to go along and say, yeah, federal government should have a carbon tax too.
Yeah.
Which we didn't have to.
No, it's interesting. So it certainly suggests that the federal government and the BC government are well past the unpleasantness over Trans Mountain and being on separate sides, that at least on some issues they are able to see eye to eye and to make common cause against these other less amenable provinces. And so I don't know if it's going to have much of an effect on what actually happens, but certainly it's not going to harm the government's case when this eventually does go to court to determine. And it seems like the federal case is pretty strong. There are a couple of previous cases they can draw on to make the claim that they have a jurisdiction to act here, and so one would expect it would be successful whether BC got involved or not. But it's sort of a nice bit of cheerleading for the government, I suppose, to show that some provinces still are on side. It's remarkable just how different the landscape is from a year ago.
Yeah, it buys John Horgan some capital, at least with Justin Trudeau for a little bit. Maybe he can go begging for SkyTrain money that he apparently needs.
He suddenly needs a lot of it.
We'll come back to money in a minute. One thing that was announced today in terms of money, though, was the government's, the legislature rose early so they could go to this BC Indigenous Chiefs meeting. I forget exactly what it's called, but coincidentally, the government announces today that they have a new plan to split BC gaming money with First Nations across BC from casinos and whatnot. And they're also going to, in the new year, start making real efforts to bring UNDRIP into the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People into BC law. And this is something the federal government has started to talk about after Romeo Saganash's private members bill passed through Parliament and Trudeau has pledged to do through his commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's reports, and BC pledged to do with John Horgan's election campaign. So what that looks like still remains to be seen, because UNDRIP is a very aspirational document with a lot of language that doesn't necessarily translate into what does that mean for all the different ways the government interacts with people. But I think it's a step in the right direction, at least.
It will be interesting. Again, we sometimes get hung up on this question of consultation versus a veto, right? How much power do Aboriginal groups have over approval of projects that affect their lands, the lands that they claim or have clear title to, and that's something that will likely end up being tested in court at some point. Again. So we've tested it quite a lot, and it's pretty clear that there are real claims that Aboriginal groups can make to land, and that those need to be dealt with properly by governments. And when there's a project that has some degree of debate over whether Aboriginal groups approve of it when it's on their territory, that there are already clear responsibilities that the government has in terms of consultation, and that's already a part of Canadian law. And it doesn't amount to an absolute veto we're seeing in the Trans Mountain case, but the government has to really engage in good faith consultations and really grapple with the issues that Aboriginal groups bring to the table. They can't just paper over. They can't just make a motion at listening without really hearing. And so I would think that, again, it depends how this implementation plays out of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Persons, but it would be a stronger recognition of that reality, that this is a country where Aboriginal groups do need to be listened to, and they can't just be dismissed outright.
Well, and I think contrasting the Horgan government against the Trudeau government's actions on this file is telling. The Trudeau government has said all the right things at most of the stages. So is the Horgan government, but we look in the last couple of years, and on fish farms, for example, the Horgan government has taken some strong but controversial stances to say every fish farm that's out there needs to get Indigenous sign-off in the next couple of years, or you're going to lose your license. They just announced a number of affordable housing beds for Indigenous people because the province feels the federal government hasn't done its duty and someone needs to build the houses. So, is it enough? I don't know, but it's definitely substantive action that the Indigenous people themselves are asking for. And with this gaming announcement, people go, oh, casino money, there's moral, ethical quandaries there. But this is something the Indigenous groups asked for. And in that case, you listen to them. They're nation to nation.
Yeah, and these Aboriginal groups, whether they are still working on land claims or their land claims have been resolved and they're now operating on some form of self-governance, they're, among other things, often remote communities with limited resources, and so money is a necessary thing. You can't just having self-government is an important piece of the puzzle, but also having the revenue to pay for what people need. And so this is a step towards addressing that unmet need and to bring funding levels closer to what they are for the rest of the country. And I think that's positive.
All right. Well, let's jump over to Nanaimo. The Greens have announced their two candidates who are competing for the nomination for the upcoming, yet to be announced, because Leonard Krogh, I don't think has resigned his seat yet, though he doesn't need to be an MLA anymore. The Greens have their two candidates. First, there's Michelle Ney, who Nanaimoans may know as the daughter of the former legendary mayor, Frank Ney. He was mayor for 21 years of Nanaimo. There is a statue of him in town and multiple buildings named after him.
Stuff of legend.
The statue is amazing because he's wearing tri-point hat with like spikes coming out the front.
What? That's awesome.
It's in the Politico Slack. Definitely worth looking up who Frank Ney was. He also served one term from 69 to 72 as a social credit MLA. He is best known, it says here in the Vancouver Sun, for donning a pirate outfit during the city's annual bathtub racing festival, which he helped establish in 1967. So that's nothing really about Michelle herself, just about her father. The other candidate is Dwayne Nicol, who I had only written down was a former BC Conservative candidate in Vancouver Point Grey in 2013, actually running against David Eby. But I'll show you the picture of Dwayne.
Okay.
He is formerly known by the nickname Dwayne Chaos. He's a punk rocker who played alongside Randy Rampage of DOA. DOA is famous for not famous for, but spawned Joe Shithead Keithley, who is now a counselor in Burnaby.
The musicians are taking over as places.
The punk rockers are really trying to take over the Green Party.
Well, if they take the message of punk seriously, well...
But you wouldn't usually go via the BC Conservatives.
No, perhaps not, unless you're, burning down structures in opposite to free choice.
So it'll be curious to see which of them pick the nomination. I think Michelle's probably got the better shoe-in. As far as I could tell, Dwayne lives more in Victoria. Ney is a retired teacher and has that deep connection probably with Nanaimo. The Greens make their pick on December 15th. It's still a really, really long shot for the Greens to make a splash in Nanaimo. I think The one poll there was, that's the Main Street one, that's a bit, you can put your question marks on it, showed it as a neck and neck Liberal NDP race. And it's been an NDP riding for almost all of history, except like the time the NDP lost everything. So,
and we're not seeing really the groundswell of discontent with the sitting government that you would associate with a by-election setback. I mean, they can happen, but this doesn't seem like the kind of environment where you'd encounter that. It is interesting that he jumped from the Conservatives to the Greens, and he jumped from Point Grey to Nanaimo.
I mean, maybe he got priced out of Vancouver and had to move to the island.
That is entirely possible.
Common story. In terms of other elections that are coming up, the referendum is still ongoing. Right after we finished recording the last episode, the Elections BC announced they're extending the time to get the ballots in till December 7th. So you now have one more week. The postal strike is officially over because people have been legislated back to work, though I think there's still some wildcat job action going on. So get your ballot in, go to a service center, turn it in. Numbers have been slowly ticking up in the daily releases. It jumped to 30%, I think, on Monday, and it's up to 34%. The last couple of days has only been like a fraction of a percent a day. So it seems like it's slowed down, but getting a third of the ballots in to hopefully get to 40% at least means questions of legitimacy are hopefully off the table, since that's a municipal turnout.
Yeah. Once you're over 30%, you can say, well, that's not great, but there are jurisdictions that routinely operate at 30%. So it's not indefensible at that point. If it creeps up to 40%, then there are Alberta elections that don't get too much more than that. And the American midterms would be thrilled to get 40% turnout. So it's still not what you'd like to see, but at least it's a defensible number.
And it's still totally unclear what side will win. The Too Close to Call, Brian Bregu, is sort of tracking it based on a weighted how much each riding voted Liberal versus NDP and how much they've returned their votes. And he's kind of like ticked it to 51 to 49. I think for first past the post is still in the lead, but with a margin that slim, any assumption he made may have been wrong, and it could be wildly different. So every vote matters.
Every vote does. We're going to see, well, I guess it'll be in December. We'll see the results. And I honestly don't know. It's going to be quite close. There are, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen signals that support both sides if you're just trying to speculate. So if you think that younger voters are going to vote more for proportional representation, they've actually started to turn out more, particularly as Metro Vancouver has voted in greater numbers. One of the interesting elements of the turnout that Too Close to Call brought to my attention was this fact that when people's ballots actually got to their door has affected the turnout for that entire district, which does and does not make sense. Like, you would think you have one election to get your vote in. So if you're going to vote, you'll do that election. But having an extra couple of days still, even now, remains a statistically significant predictor of total vote output for each district. And so because ballots went out at different times across the province, my understanding is that there were a few places in downtown Vancouver that got them early, but by and large, the interior got them before most of the Lower Mainland. There have been fewer ballots, and they've been later in coming from the Lower Mainland. And
I almost wonder if that's tied to like the excitement of the ballots going out and coverage and just people being more aware of it. And as soon as they got it, they're like, oh, I will do this. Versus if you get a little bit later, you've sort of forgotten about it, because in the second week, no one's thinking about it as much.
That's part of it. And certainly that seems like we're seeing less attention now, which is corresponding with this decline in the rate of turnout. But there's this separate effect where the turnout does start to catch up. So the rates from Metro Vancouver are catching up to those of the interior, but they took some time to do it, and they still haven't quite caught up with one another. So it suggests something you would not necessarily have expected, but getting all the voting packages to doorsteps at the same time actually matters for turnout, and by extension matters a little bit for fairness. But all of which is to say, I'm glad to see that we do have this 1 week extension, because that would be another week for those numbers to even out. So I am glad we're giving everyone an extra week, even if it looks like not too many more people are casting ballots. You still have time, so go and cast those ballots.
Indeed. Well, and the last thing I want to touch on is on Monday, the government released its second quarterly report, and this would have actually been relatively big news were it not for everything else going in the province, because the government has actually eliminated its operating debt, which is just basically how much debt it's carrying to pay off things as it goes. Operating debt doesn't sink a government, clearly. The Liberals ran one for a long time, even though some in the government really didn't like that. I think Mike DeYoung famously, it was like his wish, but no one else really cared. And it's kind of like an accountant's issue of like, we need to get rid of the operating debt, and everyone else is like, I don't care, let's build a bridge. And they're like, where are you going to pay for that? So the fact the BC NDP has done that pretty quickly is more a comment, I guess, on their priority to do that than necessarily the fiscal state of the province is so good, because they've only been government for 2 years, and governments don't change economies pretty quickly.
No, not that quickly, but it's not a bad sign for the overall health of the books. You wouldn't expect, if the situation was rapidly worsening, that they would prioritize that, but maybe they just really wanted to make Mike DeYoung happy.
Well, and the province has taken on a number of new spending initiatives, both the Supreme Court mandated schools and education funding that they had to do, but they were going to put more money into education anyway. The childcare program, trying to keep ICBC afloat, which it turns out is still doing bad, also in the same forecast. But beyond that, the government does actually project for 2018-19, there's a surplus of $1.35 billion, which I think in the budget, they were only talking about a few $100 million, like we're going to get it pretty close. And I think just a few things went well, like housing has still done well. ICBC's not doing as bad as they expected. Mm. And it just opens up a bit more room. That leaves them with the possibility to do more in the spring.
Yeah, we will be watching. We're always watching the budget with interest, but now we'll get a little more sense about where this government puts its priorities. So presumably they're not going to be in as big a hurry to pay down the net debt as the Liberals might be, but they may still do some of that, but they're also able to take on new priority spending. They could even, depending on what they project out going into the future, might be able to take on some of the big ticket items that BC talks about, but it have always been out of reach. So whether it's a substantial new investment in childcare or a drug plan, they might start thinking along those bigger lines, or they might just try to shore up these ongoing smaller issues. They can try to deal more definitively with ICBC, for instance, or any number of other things. So that's going to be fun to speculate about going into the budget cycle.
Yeah, the NDP, if you go through what they put in their platform and what they put in the confidence and supply agreement with the Greens, it's basically checked it all off, whether you wanted them to or not. They've done most of those things with ride hailing in there, maybe not in the way people want it and maybe not in the speed people want it, but the platform bits are checked off. And so that gives them the freedom now to govern as they will, which is how our system works. But it doesn't tell us what they're going to spend on. Like, we assume they're going to continue to expand the childcare program, as they said, but beyond that.
So it does suggest that in the fairly near future, we may see a prorogation, even a very short one.
I think it may have already happened.
Has it already happened?
Yeah, because they finished all their bills, so they want a throne speech in the
spring. I hadn't heard if they'd formally prorogued, but then we'll see a new throne speech, and then we'll get a new agenda, and that'll might be an interesting time for the Greens as well. If the current confidence and supply agreement is largely fulfilled, then do we have a new round of negotiation? Does the NDP continue to do mostly what they want? And is there a point at which the Greens, a lot of this hinges on the outcome of the referendum, but is there a point at which the Greens don't feel like they're part of this agenda, or are they incorporated in new ways into the next throne speech? That'll be another interesting development to watch.
Yeah, I know I participated in the Finance Committee's consultations because you can, and they were looking for people to submit as many things and prioritize things as much as you could. And I read the report out of there, and it was actually a unanimous report endorsed by all the Liberals, Greens, and NDP on the committee, but it also didn't say anything interesting.
It does make it easier to endorse.
Yeah. It's like we should spend on students with special needs.
The health of British Columbians.
Yeah. I did pull up the actual fiscal and debt summary. BC budgeted for a surplus of 219 million, and we're now at 1.35 billion, which is a healthy jump. Our total debt right now is 66 billion, which is actually down from the budget of 69 billion. So it's decent, but our debt to GDP ratio is 14%, and that's actually down from what they projected. And I think that's what most economists will tell you is not too bad.
No, it's not bad. I mean, it is a little bit different to compare simply because it's only one part of the total debt to GDP ratio for a given inhabitant of BC.
Yeah.
But and the fact that it's going down is a positive sign. And no government benefits from having no debt, right? There's certain value to carrying a certain amount of debt to pay for necessary infrastructure and spending now, assuming it's being spent reasonably, responsibly, and then simply over time through processes like inflation, then the governments actually benefit from carrying that debt. The debt actually becomes less onerous over time, and so as long as that ratio is not spiraling out of control, then there's nothing wrong with maintaining a certain amount of debt. But then again, of course, if you bring it down in good times, if you need to suddenly ramp up spending in a downturn, then that does open up that opportunity as well.
All right. Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground and we can end it there. Before I close off the show, where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter, although perhaps not for the next few days. I have a lot of marking to do. And so just my name on Twitter. And that's mostly it. They can find me in classrooms all over the Lower Mainland.
Teaching anything fun in the spring?
Oh man, what am I teaching? I am teaching American politics at Simon Fraser.
That sounds boring.
Oh yeah, I know. Nothing interesting happens in American politics. So I'm teaching American politics. I'm teaching a course called From Dictatorship to Democracy on all types of regimes around the world. And I'm teaching a couple of intro level courses. So it should be a good semester. I'm teaching at SFU and Langara this time.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That's been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. If you're a first-time listener, make sure to subscribe and let us know what you think. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. And if you have ideas for the show, feel free to send them to us. Thanks for listening.
And seriously, you should get on the Slack channels because you get some really interesting conversations and information from them. Highly recommended.
Yeah, we invite all our past guests there as well to keep it interesting.
I also ended up contributing because I didn't want to be a freeloader, but I learn a lot simply from watching the conversations unfold.
All right, and good night.